All right, we're back. It's another Carolina podcast. Happy Wednesday, everybody. If you're listening to this today, happy Thursday if you're listening to it on Thursday. And if you're listening to it any other time, then not happy whatever day it is. I'm Pearson Fowler here with Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark, as always, to talk a little bit more about the Florida game. I hope y'all got a chance to listen to Wes and Chris do their No Huddle podcast on Monday with some immediate kind of reactions to the Florida game, in particular the officiating, which was certainly and unfortunately a big storyline coming out of that game. Also, hope you got a chance to listen to the Monday Get Cocky podcast. Will Helms had some really good numbers from Pro Football Focus and S&P that help explain what was, I think, still a somewhat confusing 38-27 final scoreline, as I think the feeling around here, at least amongst the three of us, is still that Carolina played a pretty good game and that 11 points is probably not a real indicative margin of how this game played out. But we're going to go through a couple more big picture things from the Florida game, as we look ahead to Carolina's next three games, which are all very winnable. A Texas A&M game that now looks a lot more intriguing in terms of a game that Carolina could potentially steal down the stretch. Go through a little buy or sell, recap last week's, and then go through this week's buy or sell ahead of the Tennessee game and talk about the recruiting scandal that Carolina has on its hands now, the timing of which is very, funny, suspicious, however you want to call it. It's something. But, guys, let's get started again with the Florida game. As I mentioned, a lot of the conversation.
There was sarcasm in that recruiting scandal for those who didn't catch it.
What?
That it's a recruiting scandal.
Oh, yeah. The scandal part was sarcastic.
Yes.
The part that it was very, I don't know.
Yes.
The timing of it. Comment was not sarcastic at all. But the Florida game, we've all spent a lot of time talking about the officiating, and it was terrible. And Will Muschamp and South Carolina have still not heard back from the gutless Office of Officiating at the SEC. I mean, it's really just they're embarrassing themselves. And I like to pile on because I'm a vindictive jerk, I guess. But we don't need to pile on them more other than just to say that they suck and they're incompetent and they're stupid and they're gutless and just respond because that is your only job. I don't know what else they're doing. But in terms of the actual football game, as I mentioned earlier, it seems like the three of us still generally feel pretty good about how Carolina played on Saturday. Does what happened on Saturday change your opinion about these next three games for Carolina, maybe Texas A&M and maybe Clemson?
I wouldn't say a whole lot. I thought the takeaway for me was that, South Carolina belonged on the field with what is, supposedly a top 10 team in the country. I didn't really see a lot of separation. Obviously, they're two teams that are built pretty differently, but as far as just Carolina being on the field and being in a position to win the game, Carolina belonged on the field, two evenly matched teams. I honestly, watching the game in person, it felt to me, even though it was close or even tied for much of the game, it felt to me like South Carolina was sort of controlling the game. I don't know if that was just my perception when I rewatched it. Controlling the game may be a little strong, but definitely in position to win the thing for the entire game, which is a positive about what this team is right now. The negative, of course, would be that when it really mattered, when it came down to it, Florida made some plays, South Carolina didn't, and it just sort of, any game that comes down to a handful of plays, it either goes your way or it doesn't, and give Florida credit. As much as we've talked about the officials, you do have to give Florida credit for making the plays down the stretch.
Chris, before the season, it seemed like everyone, especially in Columbia, was kind of out on Florida. They were kind of overrated. They didn't deserve to be a top 10 team. That conversation has kind of ebbed and flowed throughout this season, and I think really peaking after they beat Auburn. How do you feel about Florida after Saturday's game?
I still feel like it's a good team. I was one of those people that thought Florida was a little overrated as a top 10 team. And, I think we mentioned this last week. I don't know that you'd put them in that top 4 or 5, as a team that would really, really compete in a playoff setting. I think they could be competitive against some of those teams that are in the upper echelon. But, look, LSU, that's a good example of it. They went on the road. They were in that game. LSU dominated Florida on offense against Florida's defense, ran 48 plays, scored however many points, and really did whatever they want from a passing or rushing standpoint. But Florida was right with them. And that, to me, is what stood out is after Franks went down, Kyle Trask comes in. And they do a really nice job offensively. And for most of that game, they're sort of matching LSU score for score. You just felt like they'd probably run out in the end, and that's what happened. But they have the quality win against Auburn. They've beaten, a good Auburn team. They did a great job defensively against Auburn. They made enough plays on offense to win. And South Carolina's a quality win, too, because this is a South Carolina team that has been competitive all year in almost every situation. They've beaten Georgia. They weren't competitive in the first half against Missouri, But other than that, they've been competitive in every other game. They haven't gotten really blown out, at all. And I think they're playing better football at this point in the season than they were certainly against North Carolina at the beginning of the year. Right, they're playing a lot better. And so I think it was a quality win for Florida. And it's a good team. They're missing some pieces up front. Two starting defensive ends out in Zuniga and Greenard, who are going to be back for the Georgia game most likely, and still missing Kadarius Toney. They had a quarterback change. But we knew that from a skill position standpoint, they're pretty good. Dan Mullen's obviously a good play caller, and then defensively they've got a good secondary. They've still got a group of a front seven that's still pretty good as well. And I think they just, again, like you guys said, they just made a few more plays there down the stretch. It was two evenly matched teams, and that's pretty much how the game played out.
Most of my, lower expectation for Florida at the beginning of the season was because I didn't think Felipe Franks was a guy to quarterback a top 10 team in the country. He was just too inconsistent. And I think we're now at the point where it's not like, oh, is Kyle Trask better than Felipe Franks? It's like, no, there's no question about it. If you still have any doubt in your mind that Felipe Franks is better than Kyle Trask, you're crazy. And not just because of the consistency, not just because he doesn't make the mistakes, because he makes plays too. He makes plays that Franks doesn't make with consistency. The difference in the game Saturday for me, because again, when you look at the box score, when you look at pretty much every single number, it was a very even game. It's like, how the heck was this an 11-point spread? It was Kyle Trask. It was Kyle Trask making throws, making timely plays. The drive where Florida would eventually go ahead for the last time. 24-20. I guess it wasn't the go-ahead score, but it was when they took the lead for good in that game. Kyle Trask converted 2 third downs with his legs, and then there was the 3rd and 8 where he was able to scramble and get it into 4th and 3 territory, where it was sort of a manageable situation for Florida, where they didn't feel the need to either punt and try and pin South Carolina deep or kick a field goal. It was a 4th and manageable, and it was also his legs on 4th and 3, scrambling out to his left, extending the play, and eventually finding the guy and converting the first down. And then I think they scored either on the next play or 2 plays later. He was the difference for me in that game. And I could not and would not have foreseen that would be the difference. But I think with Kyle Trask, especially playing like he is, not making mistakes, I guess he did make the one mistake throwing that pick to Jamie Robinson, but I think more than made up for it down the stretch. That's kind of been the difference in this Florida team for me. I also wouldn't have expected that they would be this bad running the football. I thought that was going to be a little more balanced because Carolina did a great job against them again. If you wipe out the 75-yard run, which generally I'm not in favor of saying that, but there are 2 very obvious reasons why that should not have been on the table. South Carolina held Florida to 2.7 yards a rush that game, which, again, all those things, like what was the difference? I think Kyle Trask.
Well, and I think Trask has just become he's that sneaky good quarterback that doesn't really have the huge arm, or even great size that guys look at when they're sort of scouting out a quarterback. But he just makes things happen, like you said, with his legs as well. And, it's a guy that's been a backup like his entire life, was a backup in high school as well. And I guess Florida maybe didn't even really know what they had with him. And, Felipe Franks is like the example of the guy that gets the, recruiting folks all excited. And he's a big-armed kid. And, the NFL scouts, I'm sure, had their eye on him at least to an extent as far as his career goes. And then Trask is sort of the unassuming guy. The first quarter, first half, man, he's out there throwing lollipops in the rain. Looked like he couldn't figure out how to grip the football with the weather and just was, lobbing the ball all over the place. It was coming out funny, but then with the game on the line, this guy made the plays, and you got to give him credit. But I think also the difference for me, not just Trask, was that, let's look at Florida's 3 big drives there at the end. They weren't more so drives. They were short fields. Florida, which, I don't think he extended plays for first downs on that touchdown drive because they started that drive at the 50. And, Carolina has basically, I think, played field position for most of the game, it seemed like. And then Florida finally gets a chance to pin South Carolina back. Then what happens? South Carolina goes 3 and out. They punt it back. Florida gets the ball right at midfield. I thought the third down was just as big as the 4th down when he was
the 3rd and 8. Yeah, that was the
forward because there's 3 guys around him, and it wasn't really, they weren't missed tackles because the guys were sort of being half blocked as well. But Trask he's got that knack for just sort of escaping and getting out of there, and he gets out, gets forward, takes an absolute shot from JT Ebay, but had gotten close enough, like you said, to where they felt comfortable going for it. In a similar situation, one drive earlier, they were backed up a little bit further, and they decided to punt it. So that tells you where their mindset was. But then to get the ball out, and the very next play after he completes the fourth down, they hit the little – it kind of turned into a wheel route. I don't even know if it was designed that way, but hit it into the window of the zone, and then – very next drive, short field because of the fumble. Then very next drive is short field because she had to go for it on fourth down. So I think that was partially, when the two teams were playing full field football, the defenses actually, I thought, controlled the game for the most part, save a few big explosive plays. But then at the end there, Florida took advantage of having really good field position.
So I think I left the game. I didn't feel like I learned a lot about South Carolina, and I don't mean that as like a criticism. I just think it kind of confirmed what we thought we knew about this team in terms of the defense is much improved. The defensive line is excellent. Maybe still some question marks in the secondary, specifically at the safety position. I think R.J. Roderick, I don't remember actually what Wilhelm said in terms of like how his game went according to the Pro Football Focus grades, but watching it, I mean, he was directly responsible for two of Florida's touchdowns. Obviously, the one that should have been wiped off because of the false start and the holding, that was still his fault because he seemed to fill the wrong gap and, I mean, left a gap that you could have driven an 18-wheeler through, and obviously Pierce took that one to the house. And then there was obviously the first touchdown they scored where R.J. Roderick seemed to be playing for the tip and just misjudged everything about the play. I think he was playing football. I can't be sure. It was just a disaster. But other than that, the defense was still good. The offense ran the ball very well, which is what we've seen all year. That makes sense. And the other part of that is the passing game still hasn't been able to click. Part of it's because Ryan Helinski's been a little bit banged up. Part of it's because South Carolina's receivers, outside of Brian Edwards, just really haven't played that well this year. We spent a lot of time in the preseason saying who's going to be that third guy. Is it going to be Ortre Smith? Is it going to be Josh Vann? Maybe Xavier Legette's going to find himself in the mix. Right now, South Carolina can't even find a reliable second receiving option. And I think that's like the most troubling. 8 passing touchdowns this year in 7 games. That's just not good enough.
Well, I think they have to find a way to get the ball to Shi Smith. He's gotten the ball in some situations where he really doesn't have room to operate. And, I think the big question, moving forward is obviously we've seen the running game sort of come into its own. And to give them credit, we'll talk about the passing game and the running game because it's really two completely opposite sides of the spectrum. For me, to give them credit, the running game hasn't just been good. The running game has evolved. And, they started out early on as an inside zone RPO-based team as far as the running game goes. Now they're a pin and pull, get the ball out on the edge a little bit, get movement up front. They've basically taken what they do well and what they execute well, and they've based the entire offense around that as far as the running game goes. And then they've mixed in different complementary plays to that. This pin and pull has some unique tendencies to it in that based on the defensive alignment, sometimes it's the 2 guards pulling, sometimes it's a center and a guard, sometimes it's a guard and a backside tight end pulling. And so there's some nuance to it. They mixed in this new RPO delayed handoff from the shotgun that's been very, very kind to them. They had a counter play that we really haven't seen much this year, and did ran a little bit of inside zone this past week. They had a quarterback draw. They had a true zone read. So the running game, they've focused in on what they do well, and then they've been able to build the rushing attack around that. I think now we have to see that from the passing game as well, and I think some of those deep balls were there, but Muschamp, one of the first things he has said when he's talked this week and right after the game is the passing game has to get better. Mm-hmm. And people may instantly say, well, that, he's talking about Ryan Helinski because he's the quarterback. But I went through every single throw in the game, and, yes, sometimes it's a missed throw. On a lot of these deep balls we're talking about, there's one where maybe if he leads Shi to the left pylon on one of the early deep balls, it's a completion, it's a big play. Other times there's really not a heck of a lot of separation from the receiver. It's going to take those were not all high percentage throws. It was going to take some really good throws in the rain.
And you're playing against a really good secondary, probably the best tandem of corners that Carolina's going to see this year. But I think where fans' frustration lies is you saw Kyle Trask. Not that Kyle Trask aired it out and threw it on the field that much, but he gave his receivers a chance to make a play. And this seems like it's been a common thread. This happened with Jake Bentley some last year, and it's happened with Ryan Helinski some this year. you kind of want to just give your guys a chance to go up and make a play. Second play of the game or third play of the game, Carolina runs that flea flicker, throws it up to Brian Edwards. It wasn't the most perfect ball. He doesn't hit him perfectly in stride, but Brian goes up and makes a play for you. So I think some of those balls, it's like they're trying to throw it too perfectly, and you'd rather them throw it, maybe it's a little bit higher risk to get intercepted, but you also are trusting your receivers to go up and make a play. I don't know what the right answer is, because if Ryan Helinski threw 2 picks instead of just 2 misses on those deep balls, obviously people would be talking a lot more negatively about his performance, but, give your guys a chance sometimes.
Yeah, and I think my big thing is, several times pass protection was an issue. Several times it's, I think this goes back to the quarterback. You don't see that there's a cornerback blitz coming at all. That's, a situation where it's a sight read, I guess, and you got to get the ball out hot. There was one play where they tried to cut down the offensive lineman and run a slant behind it. The slant is there. It's wide open, but 2 offensive linemen didn't get their defensive lineman cut enough to where that they, that entire design is to keep that ball from being batted. And there was a slant that got batted in the air because the lineman didn't cut the defensive lineman in front of him all the way. So, if you look at sort of this passing game, there's a multitude of reasons why it is what it is. I think you sort of have to make a more concerted effort to try and get Ryan Helinski some throws that can get his confidence up and can let him find a rhythm, because to me, this game was a lot of little quick screens to the outside, which have been good for South Carolina, and then a lot of deep balls. But I don't know how much of a rhythm we've seen them be able to get the quarterback in, when right now your focus is the running game, and rightfully so. I'm not saying you have to get completely away from that. I think they're still sort of working to find that balance between this running game and an efficient passing game, because right now when a sequence of 3 downs is 2 runs and a pass, and the one pass is a deep ball, and that was pretty consistent against Florida, I feel like. I just wonder how difficult it is to get in a rhythm when it's like run, pass, run, pass, run, and they're not really high percentage throws. I think we're going to have to see them work the intermediate areas, the middle areas a little bit more, and try to continue to marry this running game with a more efficient passing game, as far as not just when you call passes in general, but what pass plays you're calling, I think.
It's really complicated. It kind of goes back to the identity thing that we've talked about with this team as a whole. And I think we've seen it last year, and we're seeing it this year, just in terms of lack of identity on offense, and I guess specifically in this case, lack of identity in the passing game. I don't want to criticize like the individual play calls, because I thought Brian McClendon called a fine game. Like, people have killed him for calling that passing play on, what was it, 1st and goal from the 6, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like, that is the stupidest thing ever. We're just litigating results. If Ryan Helinski throws a touchdown pass there, no one says a damn thing about that being a bad call. The problem is Ryan Helinski didn't see the corner blitz. Now, maybe that's some inexperience. Maybe he needs to improve his pocket awareness, because y'all talked about how, Kyle Trask, as much as anything, just such an asset for him is his ability to sort of feel pressure. He's got that internal clock in his head that maybe is just something you develop. Like, you're right, he hasn't been a starter, but he has been playing college football for longer than Ryan Helinski, so that's something that maybe you just get more of a feel for as you get more comfortable with the game. But I put that more on Helinski than McClendon. But that to say, I think McClendon called a fine game. But what is the passing identity of this team? Like, if you want to take shots, that's great. If you feel like you can hit them. If you want to be more of that, dink and dunk team with lots of slants, quick outs, option routes from your tight ends like we saw against Alabama, do that. But there just doesn't seem to be any consistency game to game in terms of how Carolina is attacking teams in the passing game. And I think if we want to zoom out even a little bit further and say, what is like the real source of fans' frustration with Carolina's offense? And Chris, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's like last year, Carolina passed the ball pretty well. Jake Bentley was up and down, but ultimately, like, the passing numbers were pretty good for Carolina. You felt reasonably good about their ability to air it out. We saw it against Clemson. We saw it a couple times throughout the season. Ole Miss. There were games in Carolina, it just looked like a true kind of air raid attack. It was just, okay, if Carolina can get the running game fixed, this offense would be humming. And now this year, Carolina comes in, and Wes, you were telling me the stats before we started recording this, and it's probably the most productive rush offense South Carolina's had since 2013 in terms of just like pure rushing numbers.
It's like
in
197 a game, and then it's like 5.5 yards a rush.
Yeah, and then in terms of yards per carry, like it's even more dramatic. Like, I don't even know when you have to go back to find a South Carolina team that ran the ball as efficiently on a per carry basis as this team, and now all of a sudden the passing game's falling apart. I don't want to say totally falling apart, but 8 passing touchdowns in 7 games, 170 passing yards for Ryan Helinski on Saturday. Sure, he was dealing with a little bit of a knee. It was wet. But the fact of the matter is Kyle Trask was dealing with similar circumstances, wet ball playing on the road, and just had a much more efficient game, had 200 yards, threw some passing touchdowns. It's just, I think if you told Carolina fans that the running game was going to be fixed this year, they would have felt great about the offense, and they still haven't scored 30 points against an FBS opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a combination of factors. I think, from game to game, this is a team that may, and there's nothing wrong with that may look different. I mean, that's how we've seen the run game evolve. Like Wes said, in the beginning of the year, what we saw from this team running the football is different than what we see now. And they've sort of put in some new things, and they've done that in the passing game as well. They have made some adjustments in the passing game based on opponent or just even within a game. I think there's just a lot of other factors that make this what it is. One is, again, the North Carolina game, I think, was more of an aberration from an offensive standpoint. South Carolina didn't run it as well in that game, 128 rushing yards. The quarterback play was not good in that game, right? Brian Edwards didn't get the football. A little bit more of an aberration based on what we've seen the rest of the season. Alabama, talented team. South Carolina looked pretty good. I don't think anybody looked at that game and said, man, the play calling sucked in that game. No, it didn't. Georgia, you look at the factors in the Georgia game. Ryan Helinski's making some good throws in that game. They've got some plays that are open. They've got some plays that are sort of closer to 50-50 balls, and he's making the throws. Well, he gets hurt.
And he goes down.
Yeah. He goes his best game of the season, according to Pro Football Focus.
Okay, so that's his best game against one of the best defenses, arguably the best, right? Probably better than Alabama, in my opinion, and arguably better than Georgia. So he has his best game in that. Well, then he goes down. Then Joyner's in the game. He's not 100%, right? Your game changes. And Georgia's pretty good on defense. And then you go to, Helinski is banged up, after that. Then you've got some other things. You got maybe some drops. Then you've got plays like Wes has described where you've got guys running the sack play, the first and goal from the 6. Brian Edwards is wide open across the formation. They don't get it. You could say, well, Brian McClendon should run the ball there. Well, yeah, if they just get the ball out, though, it's probably a touchdown. Then you've got the play that Wes mentioned. They don't cut down a defensive lineman, so the slant gets blocked. Everybody's solution to the passing game is throw more slants. Well, there was one, that was open. They had some deep shots, sure, and a lot of those were off. I think you compare it to Kyle Trask. I mean, Kyle Trask threw up one ball that probably should have been at least knocked away by Jamie Robinson. He didn't, and then R.J. Roderick somehow missed the guy. That's one touchdown. Another touchdown was a obvious offensive pass interference. Good play call, good design. It was a pass interference. Another one was a screen, to Trayvon Grimes. Another one was a wide-open wheel route, another well-designed play. But it's not like Kyle Trask was out here just, look like Joseph Burrow or anything.
No, but he made the plays,
He made a few late. But, early on, Trask was...
He struggled.
Yeah. They both struggled early, and then Trask... I don't want this to be...
Helinski was throwing dimes early is the thing. He
threw some...
comes out slinging the ball like the water's not even affecting him, and Trask is...
What was he at the end of the first half? Like, he hit the long ball to Brian Edwards.
I'm saying Ryan was 3 for 3 to start the game, and the ball was coming out of his hand crisp through the rain.
And he threw the deep end to Shy on that first drive. Well thrown ball.
Right, on the 3rd and 8. Yeah.
He had,
that was the best throw anybody made.
That was the best pass he made on Saturday.
The dig route, and then there was one other throw early on. It was a screen to Brian Edwards. But I thought, I wonder what were Trask halftime numbers. Trask looked awful in the first half. And then he made some throws late. If you look at their PFF grades, Trask graded out under a 60 in this game.
I think Brian Helinski actually had a better grade than Kyle Trask, but watching the game, it just felt like he made more plays. And I guess it was just because it was in bigger moments. Obviously, it's really easy to make a throw to an open receiver when you're allowing wide receivers to block several yards down the field when your wide receiver's also running down the field, so maybe I shouldn't give him credit for that. And maybe I am giving him too much credit, but it just seemed like down the stretch, it was Trask making the plays, and South Carolina's offense was not able to do that.
No, you're right. You're totally right. But, and then I think you get when you get down later in that game, then it's late, right? The game turns, and it turns late. So South Carolina's got to then you got to press a little bit more. You can't go, okay, we're going to just methodically run the ball down the field.
Right.
And that's one thing is, this offense has not been explosive enough. They've had to rely a little bit too much on explosive plays at times. Sometimes they've had some methodical drives. Those are tougher to put together against your Georgias or your Floridas. We saw the early score against Florida that put them up. They had a few explosive plays. They had the flea flicker to Brian. There were some explosive plays in the run game. I just for me, guys, I think this has been an odd season. And so I can't sit here and say – I can sit here and say that the passing game is not good enough. I totally agree with that. It's got to get better. Now, you could point to a lot of different factors. They got to protect better. They got to play better at quarterback. They got to play better at receiver.
Yeah.
So then maybe you go to recruiting with that. But I just don't know that I can say, well, they just can't find any answers from a schematic standpoint. I just don't – I think it's a little bit more complex than that, and I'm not trying to give – the play calling a pass because I haven't always agreed with it, particularly when you look at how they structured things against Missouri, for example, in that first half. But I think it's just been a combination of so many different things, so many different areas to pull from that I just don't really know if I can say, well, it's identity. I agree they haven't been able to find one, but there's a lot of things that have sort of led to that.
I hate saying it's just unlucky because that feels like an excuse. And I made this distinction on my Monday podcast. I am not someone that says reasons are excuses. Like I think that's a stupid and short-sighted way to look at reasons and excuses. Like those are different things. And I don't want it to sound like an excuse, but I hate to just say Carolina's been unlucky because it's been 7 games and they've had 3 different quarterbacks have to play extended stretches of important games for them. And that's really hard to do, especially when, in the case of Ryan Helinski in the Missouri game, Ryan Helinski in the Florida game, DeCarrion Jordan in the Georgia game, like none of those guys were healthy. And I think you can see this. Eric and I talked about this a little bit on my 107.5 show on Monday. There were times when Ryan, when he would let go of that deep ball, it looked like he wasn't really stepping into the throw. And Eric said, that could be him taking care of his leg, because when you step up into the pocket, you're liable to get kind of like rolled up either by your offensive lineman or defensive player. If he's kind of shorting that in terms of his follow-through, that could be an attempt to protect his knee, which I guess also we should just say it looked fine. I mean, he had the quarterback draw that they felt comfortable calling. He kept the ball on his own read. I think those were his only 2 carries at the game, but he looked fine. He's still slow, but I mean, he didn't move like he was injured, but certainly it makes sense that was in the back of his mind in terms of not wanting to just kind of leave that leg out there and like a follow-through situation. But, I mean, is it lazy to just say Carolina's been unlucky with some of that?
Well, I mean, it's unlucky now, Jake Bentley did not play well in the first game, right? And I think Ryan Helinski has done some things at times this year that I don't know if anybody else on the roster could do. But there's also some situations you could go to and say, a senior quarterback who's made these types of plays in the past, maybe he makes those. I think that's fair too, right? I don't think
there's any doubt in anybody's mind that Ryan Helinski's a better option at quarterback for South Carolina right now than Jake Bentley.
But there are some situations in which...
Do you think Jake Bentley takes that cornerback sack? I'm not saying he would or he wouldn't. I'm just asking what you think.
Oh, man, that's hard to say.
Wait, who is to say?
Yeah,
I'm saying like those, I think those are like the margins of like veteran play,
right? I think he gets the ball out quicker there. Or he's even wiggled out of situations like that.
He's not a guy that ever got the ball out quickly. Like Ryan Helinski is the quickest draw in the SEC.
Ryan has a quicker release, yes,
statistically the quickest of all starting quarterbacks.
Even when you go back and watch Ryan in spring ball, the one area, and we talked about this, the one area where he had, I guess you could say, some struggles is blindside pressure, whether it was a corner blitz or whether it was just holding on to the ball a little bit too long in situations like that. And it's something, it'll come with experience. I don't have any doubt. But I think what I'm saying is there have been some circumstances that have been a little bit unlucky. I mean, is that a different game with Rico Dowdle? Even though South Carolina did a lot of times what it wanted in the run game, is it different with Rico? Maybe. It might be. They might have had 2 more explosive runs in that game, and that could have been a huge difference. Mm-hmm. That's unlucky. They're not their fault. I mean, he goes down on the first carry.
And the Georgia injury, it's like if Sedarius Hutcherson doesn't accidentally trip whichever defensive player that was for Georgia, I can't remember which one it was.
Adam Anderson, I think.
Yeah, like people were like, "Oh, that's such a dirty play." It's like, "Nah, dude, definitely just tripped and like fell." He may have still hit Helinski, but he definitely wouldn't have hit him low like that or not in the knee like that while he's kind of falling down out of control. I mean, that is like just really unlucky.
Yeah, and even other things like the first half against Missouri with like how erratic Ryan was. Would Jake have been a little less erratic? I think you can make that argument. You can make that argument.
Because we saw that Jake Bentley was the paradigm of calm, cool,
I
and collected in the first
didn't
quarter
say,
of
I'm
games.
not saying that, but he also, at times, showed he was capable. This team's record might be exactly the same, and I think the upside of Ryan Helinski's substantial. I wasn't even trying to make the point on saying, well, if Jake Bentley was this team's quarterback, it'd be this or that. I don't know those things. I'm just saying it does change a little bit when you have a freshman versus a senior in certain situations. There's some things that Ryan, I think, has shown that he can do better. Release certain throws that he's made that I don't think anybody else on the roster has made in the past at times. But there are also some situations where he's like a freshman. I mean, just being realistic.
Yeah, that happens.
And the run game's better. They've had some unfortunate circumstances in the passing game at times, and they've also had some they've created. Some of those plays against Florida, if they just block a guy or if they catch the football or if they get rid of the ball a little more quickly, it may be a little bit of a different ball game.
So if we're doing
their
panic,
margin for error is lower.
Yeah, but if we're doing panic meter for South Carolina's passing game, y'all are like 2 out of 10 probably.
Panic meter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not panicking if I'm a South Carolina fan, but I think, I mean, it's just so many. I mean, who could draw up, like, okay, everything we're talking about, the kid's got a knee injury, it's in the rain on the Florida game. Georgia game, he's having his best game. He comes out because of the knee injury. Missouri game, his worst game, goes into it with an elbow injury and no practice time. It's like there hasn't been, since, well, even the Alabama, you're talking about you're playing freaking Alabama, your second start of your life, or, college career.
Your first real start. Charleston Southern was definitely easier than the spring game.
So it's like, it's like every game there's been some extenuating circumstance. And yet the passing game at some point has to be better. But, I mean, we get caught on this identity thing. And, I mean, we asked for an identity. Right now, they've given us an identity. It's get in, running formations and run the football.
Defense and run the ball. That's like 4 years ago. If I told you that was the identity of this football team, well, like when Will Muschamp was hired, if I said 4 years from now, the identity of the South Carolina team will be running the football and playing defense, you would have been like 100%. I would expect nothing else.
Well, I mean, you look at the numbers. If you're looking at the passing game and the rushing numbers as far as attempts, you look at
43 carries and 35 passes or something.
Yeah, but 14 of those passes are on the final 2 drives of the game after you're down by multiple scores. I mean, the actual run-pass mix, the running, and then you can add in were there 3 sacks in the game? If Helinski ran the ball 5 times for...
Yeah, so 2 carries and 3 sacks.
Yeah, 2 carries, so 3 sacks. So take away 3 of the total rushes, put that at 40, and then add 3 to the dropbacks. You're at 38 and 40, but 14 throws are at the end of the game. The actual run-pass mix of this game was very, very run-heavy. So if we're going to sit here and say, run the football more, run the football more.
I was happy with that, yeah.
But the passing game numbers, we can't necessarily use 8 passing touchdowns as like the be-all, end-all that the passing game needs to be improved.
That's fair.
If the approach is completely different right now. And the approach, to an extent, it's worked. It's just it's different, and I think this approach is going to lead to less scoring, just because you're not using tempo as much. You're not as explosive in offense, but you're also putting your defense in better spots. And last year the defense, even though the offense was maybe scoring more at times, the defense is put right back on the field, a struggling defense at that. So
and Carolina's now for the first time in 4 years. I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing. Carolina has now in back-to-back games run more plays than their opponent, and they won the time of possession battle against Florida for the first time since 2011. They won the time of possession battle.
Yeah, so it's a different approach. It's going to affect the passing numbers. I think the thing, if I could just sum it all up, is it's not necessarily a thing of like total passing, yardage or even touchdowns or any of that. I think they have to find a way to be more efficient in the passing game. They have to do a better job of marrying what they're doing with the rushing attack to the offensive attack, finding the right balance. If you're going to throw on that first down that we're talking about where they got the sack, I would have liked some type of play action with maybe a rollout, some type of rub route maybe. Maybe we can get away with, if you're Carolina, you can get away with blocking the guy too, since Florida did. But, that's all nitpicking. I think it goes back to on defense and in the running game, they focused on what they do well, and they've sort of doubled down on that. I think with the passing game, it's about continuing to find out what Ryan Helinski's comfortable with, what the receivers are comfortable with, what the offensive line is comfortable with in pass protection, and now doubling down on that and hoping you can put it all together in this final half of the season.
Let me just say this because I know people are going to at me, and they probably already have. They probably didn't even listen the extra 2 minutes to get to this correction. Carolina's last 2 home games, they have run more plays than their opponent and won the time of possession battle. They obviously did not against Georgia, but they did against Florida, and they did against Kentucky. Last thing for the Florida game, and then we'll move into a little buy or sell as we start to talk about the Tennessee game, because that was a big concern for a lot of people. Passing game for Carolina against Florida. Sounds like we're ultimately not that concerned. Generally in agreement. I think all of us are kind of below a 5. I'm maybe at like a 4. Sounds like y'all heard about a 2. But let me throw this at you. The difference in that Carolina game is they got outscored, 21-7 in the fourth quarter. Last year, it's 14-0. So 35-7 in the last 2 fourth quarters against Florida. This year, against FBS opponents, South Carolina has been outscored 59-24 in the fourth quarter. And if you look at their last 17 FBS opponents, so all the FBS games this year and last year, just taking out those 3 FCS teams, they've been outscored 123-82. Panic meter. 59-24. This in 7 games, outscored in the fourth quarter.
Yeah,
that's more alarming to me than the passing numbers.
I assume you don't have it broken down per game at this particular time.
21 of those against Florida, some against Bama. I don't remember.
So the Florida game, I don't know if panic's the right word, so I guess still low on the panic meter. It's an area that's got to get better. I'll say that. North Carolina, they were outscored, right, in the fourth quarter, I would assume.
It was 20-9, so they got outscored 15-0 in the fourth quarter. Does that sound right?
Was it 29 going into the fourth?
I thought it was.
It was definitely in the third.
I don't remember.
So, that was, again, I don't know. There was sort of there was a 5-alarm panic after that game that was justified, but it was there were a lot of things that were more of an aberration in that game, right, than not. But
so you don't think Carolina's weak late in the game? That's what I'm getting at here. I feel like
the stats say so. So yeah. Okay. You can't argue.
So how do you fix that? Just don't
suck.
Well,
don't be as bad in the fourth quarter. But
it's not.
But it's not a blanket statement. Okay, look at what happened late in the Florida game, right? Yeah. What happened late? So,
3 short fields. You didn't execute.
Very short. That is when I was looking at the game live, when the game got late and Carolina had some plays go against them, allowed a few play. The 4th down and 3, when that happened, I was like, then they go score. They get hosed on another call. Now, maybe Florida score. They, at the minimum, probably get a field goal there, right?
Yeah.
But when those things happened, and then when the field started getting short, then you worried. When South Carolina was backed up, so you worried. Alabama, I
don't know what the margin was in the fourth quarter there. I don't know.
But
all I know is, so
that game over?
For example,
game was over.
For example, if I'm looking at the numbers from the last 2 seasons, 123-82, I know South Carolina actually outscored Georgia 7-0 in the fourth quarter in 2018. So do we just take those 7 points away for Carolina because it doesn't matter? Now it's 123-75. We can litigate what was garbage time, what was meaningful, but when you go on an individual game-by-game basis and say, well, in the Florida game, it was this. In the Alabama game, it was this. In the North Carolina game, it was this. But the point is, there are reasons there, and there are excuses for each of these late-game collapses, whatever, however you want to characterize them. But when you look over the course of the last 2 seasons, and I didn't go back to the other couple years because it took a lot of clicking, and I didn't feel like clicking anymore after I went past last season, this is a trend. And Carolina continues to be bad late in games. And maybe it's short fields, maybe it's turnover, maybe it's lack of offensive productivity, maybe the defense is giving up too many big plays. But this team has not been good down the stretch for 2 years now. At least 2 years. Again, I haven't looked at the numbers from Will Muschamp's first couple years here. That is something that I look at in the Florida game and say, I didn't learn anything new, but that continues to confirm what has been alarming me about this team for several years now.
I'm trying to find more on that stat because it looks like they were even going into the fourth quarter of the Missouri game. 34-14, which is not where you want to be.
Right.
Right, but that's what it ends up being. North Carolina. Make sure I have my mic here. North Carolina, you are 20-17 going into the fourth.
Okay, so you get outscored. Well, that was 24-20, so you get outscored 7-0.
So that was just 7-0.
Okay.
It must be that.
So what game has created the?
This is what I'm trying to figure out. Pearson, are you 100% sure of your stat?
Because the Florida game would be a 14-point.
No, 59-24. So like 21 of those are Florida. So you're looking for 38 other points.
The other
38 points in 6.
38?
Did I do that wrong?
Man, it doesn't seem like that's right. It might be.
What was the Alabama margin? Maybe they were like +4. They scored 14 points in the fourth quarter of the Alabama game.
I don't think so. Carolina scored a late touchdown, didn't they?
So it looks like at the end of the third, looks like it's 34-16 Bama.
Okay, so they scored another.
That'd be 13 for Bama, and that'd be
34, and they scored 47. So yeah, 13 there.
But Carolina scored 6, so that's 6.
No. Okay, but like to get to the 59, they've been outscored. They've been outscored by 35 points in the fourth quarter this year. But 59-24 is the margin. It was 7 against Bama, 14 against Florida, and then you're looking for a couple other touchdowns here and there. I'm right.
Okay, so even if I'm not doubting. I was just seriously just wondering where it came from. So the biggest issue is the Florida game.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
I mean, because
the Florida game this year and the Florida game last year. But look, these aren't outliers. 123-82 isn't an accident.
I'm with you. No, I'm with you. The North Carolina game, even not as much the fourth quarter as like the third. So second half of the game.
Carolina's not good at finishing football games.
Well, then
they
you've
don't
also
make big plays to win late.
You've also got the
plays.
stat that Will Muschamp pulls out, and again, I don't know the context of which opponent it's in, but the one score game,
like 14-6 or something.
Yeah, the one score game thing. Now,
but
another part of that
that's
is
like one of those was like Louisiana Tech, his second year here. It's like some of these are one score games that shouldn't be one score games, and Carolina's got to eke out.
Wait, so you said it's 123-82?
Yeah, in the last 17 FBS games.
Okay, and South Carolina was outscored by 14 against Florida this year and 21 last year. Mm-hmm. So that's a 41-point margin, and 35 of the points are against one team, against Florida.
It was 14-0 and 21-7, so yeah, 28. 28, yeah. But are you telling me you've been impressed with Carolina late in games? They don't make plays when it matters. If they win, it's because they build a lead and then hang on to it. The only game where they've made plays late and it's made a difference was the Ole Miss game last year.
Is there anything
Missouri game last year?
Is there anything wrong with building a lead and hanging on?
Huh? No, there's not. But this team tenses up.
All right, last year, destroy Coastal Carolina, get destroyed by Georgia. Carolina destroys Vanderbilt. Kentucky wasn't even really close late either. Missouri is a close game late. South Carolina makes the plays. Mm-hmm. Texas A&M is a close game late. South Carolina doesn't make the plays. Mm-hmm. Tennessee is a close game late. South Carolina does make the plays. Ole Miss is a tight game late. South Carolina makes the plays. Florida is a tight game late. South Carolina does not make the plays. Clemson.
Tight game late, does not make the plays. Well, they were down by 14 with like 9 minutes to go in the fourth, right? And then Virginia was...
I don't really think...
They had me, you, and
didn't
Wes
make plays late against North Carolina. Didn't make plays late against Florida. Did make plays late against Georgia.
Did,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really think it's a trend. Sure. It's the last 2 years, it's half and half if you break down...
The teams... Now,
if you break down the games.
I guess it's not to either of your points, or it's to neither of your points, whatever the grammatically correct way to say it is. The games that y'all are talking about that they didn't make the plays were tended to be really good teams, right? Right? Florida, Clemson. What were the other ones you mentioned from last year? UNC, not a really good team. A&M, pretty good team, ranked team, right?
They came back just to get,
and A&M came.
Yeah, Carolina came back.
They came back and just
in
fell
the second
short.
half. Yeah, actually,
and then Jay Sternberger took up Stephen Montag and gave him a bottle and pat him on the head and put him to sleep and ran down the field 60 yards.
And then
I was thinking about. Sorry to cut you off. I was thinking about the A&M game. 2 seasons ago when they were at A&M and they were in a position late and couldn't make plays. But this past year they actually struggled early on against A&M and came back in the second half and fell short.
And then lost,
So basically the teams that they did not perform as well against last year or this year tended to be, with an exception or two, good quality teams, even elite teams at times.
No.
Clemson, elite team. They won the national title.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. And the teams that they did perform well against late were either come back against Texas A&M, still lose, or teams that were not as great. So I don't know. I'm just saying I don't know what you can do with that as much as...
Well, and we could look at the numbers from the first 2 years. I don't know what that would bear out. We don't need to do that now because we're already running long on this. But are you telling me, numbers aside, my numbers aside, your numbers aside, do you feel like, when Carolina gets down or has a slim lead late, do you trust this team to win the football game?
For the most, I mean, it's...
What's your gut feeling? You're
late,
sitting in Williams-Brice
what's the
Stadium.
margin?
Carolina's up by 3 with like 6 minutes. Did you think Carolina was going to win that Georgia game? And you can say no because it's Georgia, but nobody thought Carolina was going to win that game, especially after they missed the field goal after the pick in overtime.
I'll say this. Going into the fourth quarter of the South Carolina-Florida game on Saturday, I thought South Carolina, A, looked like the better team, and B, was about to win the football game.
See,
I did too.
I thought as soon as Florida tied it up at 17 and it totally deflated the stadium, I thought, oof, this feels like the kind of inflection point that Carolina's going to want back.
But
and
they did.
As it
they
turned
did.
out,
Well, of course they wanted it back. It should have been.
Well,
not
right,
happened.
yeah, and like that point aside, but like Florida leveled it up after Carolina had gotten the pick. They were +1 in turnover margin. The crowd was in it, and Florida was still tied. Carolina wasn't. I mean, they're running the ball well. They had missed some deep shots at that point. I don't know. Maybe this just speaks more to me personally, and y'all are a little bit more optimistic, and I'm a little bit more pessimistic. But I'm guilty of this. I'm very guilty of this, of getting too analytical. Sometimes you just have to say, what does it feel like is the case with this team or this player or whatever? And when Carolina gets into a late situation, again, maybe it's not fair because 2 weeks ago they just beat the number 3 team in the country on the road because it's not even so much because they made plays late. It's like Georgia, like really had some plays they wanted back in that game. But Carolina was able to capitalize.
South Carolina made the plays. I
guess so, man.
That's
when they missed that 33-yard field goal, it's like.
But you just gave. I mean, you gave Kyle Trask credit for a touchdown pass that one of them they illegally blocked, and 2, the next time 2 South Carolina defenders missed it. Mm-hmm. So you could say South Carolina didn't. You know what I'm saying. So they still made the plays. South Carolina made the plays. They got some key run stops. They got some picks that whatever happened on them, they made the play. They could have dropped the ball. They could have not been in position.
Sure.
So I mean,
so you feel like you feel like in any game, good opponent, bad opponent, whatever, Carolina's either down 4 or up 3 late in the game, you feel good about this team's chances of winning. That's all I'm talking about.
No, I feel like I can't say that because I feel like it's a huge blanket statement. I think it depends on.
All right, Tennessee. Carolina's playing Tennessee this week, and they're down by 4 with 7 minutes to go.
If you're down or up by 4 against anyone with 7 minutes left, then you have a chance to win the game.
Do you feel good about it? If you're an Alabama fan, you feel great about that.
If you're also Alabama, you're the best program for the last decade. Like, are you putting it as in like?
I think y'all are missing the point here a little bit.
No, I get what you're saying, but you can't just say, okay, pick Tennessee. Yeah, I'd feel pretty decent about that. If you say pick Clemson or Georgia, I'd say no, I don't feel as good about it. But I mean,
are you saying?
I said Tennessee because I'm thinking like opponents.
Yeah, I'd feel pretty. If Carolina's down by 4, yeah, I'd feel pretty decent that they'd have a chance. I don't say they're going to win this game. I have no idea. What's the circumstances? I mean, it's just I felt like against Georgia, I felt like later in the game after Georgia after Carolina committed, say, the defensive holding, I didn't feel as great about it because they could have gotten off the field, probably run out the clock.
Mm-hmm. That stuff kind of
after
happens.
Parker White missed the field goal, I didn't feel as good about it. I just felt like that was going to be the flow of the game. I still felt good about Carolina winning in the fourth quarter, like Wes said, because I thought they'd outplayed Florida and had some tough circumstances. But when it got a little bit later into the fourth quarter and the field started to get really short for Carolina and they weren't doing much on offense, you could tell that it had sort of shifted. Then I didn't feel good about it. So I don't know. I just can't. Yeah, I'm with Wes. I think it's a fair question.
Yeah, I just think if you go game by game, it's pretty even.
Okay.
The last 2 years.
All right. That's fine.
I think statistically.
Hopefully this sparks a discussion on the message boards because I don't think I'm crazy here.
I think the statistical difference is that of the ones that we pointed out that South Carolina won, it didn't end up being where they had huge fourth quarters. It was fairly even fourth quarters, but the ones that I've pointed out that did not go South Carolina's way, like you said, you had a 14-point margin to go for Florida and then a 14-point fourth quarter margin for Florida last year. That's 28 of the 41 points right there.
South Carolina was down to Texas A&M 16-0 with 4:54 left in the third quarter last year.
And loss was it 27-20 or something?
It was 26-23.
26-20. Ooh.
So that was more. I mean, Carolina outscored them, later in that ball game. I mean, 23-10 in a span of 20 minutes. So that situation, they didn't start well, and we've talked about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Like against Kentucky during the streak, they didn't start well enough at times.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
I don't know. I just don't.
I think they have to play more
team
consistently throughout the course of the entire football game, first quarter to fourth quarter.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's the
and
answer.
I think a lot of that goes back to just being a better football. Like you got to be a better.
You got to be
football
better
team.
overall.
The teams that are really good at ends of games normally are good football teams. The teams that are more consistent normally are because they have pretty good players. I feel like
We've talked for 45 minutes, and we have arrived at Carolina. If they want to be a better football team, they need to start by being a better football team. Which means
if they want to be good in fourth quarters, they need to be a better football team.
Well, this is a great opportunity to segue into a little buy or sell. So, Chris, tell us about the Bishop team.
Yeah, Terry Bishop of the Bishop Real Estate Group, former Gamecock quarterback, huge supporter of the program, 36 years of real estate experience. So obviously, if you have a question about buying, selling, investing in real estate, he's your guy, and a big Gamecock supporter, knows what he's doing. So Facebook.com/the Terry Bishop team or 803-665-1442.
Thanks so much to the Bishop team for sponsoring Buy or Sell because we love this. This is our favorite. Wes won again last week, 3-0. We did very well, though.
Wes.
Chris, you and I were 2-1. Wes was 3-0. Here's what we had. Buy or sell. Florida is held to 100 yards rushing or fewer. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of issue with this. Y'all both sold it, and that's why you went 2-1 and you went 3-0, and I bought it. And we all acknowledge that the 75-yard touchdown was not a thing. So I'm making you choose right now, knowing that this is going to be posted on Gamecock forums everywhere. Should that rushing touchdown have stood?
What?
Should the rushing touchdown have stood? The 75-yard?
No.
Okay, great. Then I win.
Okay,
I win. Now I'm 3-0.
It
You were 1-2, and you were 2-1.
Okay.
I mean, South Carolina only gave up, what 154 minus 75? Is that
Whatever.
79 rushing yards? Yeah. All right, cool.
Right.
So I won this week. So
congratulations.
Also, South Carolina has over 2.5 sacks. Wes, you sold. I also sold. Chris bought. It was just 2. So close. As always.
Hey, yeah.
That's close.
See?
And lastly, South Carolina scores 30 points. We all sold it. South Carolina ends up with 27. Made us sweat it out there. I was hoping for a backdoor cover and Carolina getting to 30 points, but did not happen. So here's what we got this week. South Carolina's going to Knoxville. They're playing Tennessee. First up, buy or sell. South Carolina will run more plays than Tennessee.
Ooh, that one caught me off guard. Run more plays than Tennessee.
Buy.
Just throw your hands up.
Yeah, I buy.
I'll sell.
You're selling?
Yeah,
I didn't write the numbers down for some reason because I was looking at it yesterday, and I think Tennessee ran like 18 plays total 2 weeks ago, and they ran like 30 against
unofficial
Alabama.
stat.
Yeah, unofficial stat. Like they've been horrible. Now, this has kind of gotten interesting in the last couple of weeks with Carolina because, like I said, what they did against Kentucky, what they did against Florida, in terms of running the ball, controlling the line of scrimmage. I think I'm gonna buy it, but I'm just wary about this team on the road. I know they just won in Athens in their last road game, but in general, I'm a little bit worried about this team on the road.
So you're saying you're buying, but it'll be close.
I'm buying, but it'll be close.
That's my move.
So you're
You
buying
can't do
too,
that.
and
Yeah,
Chris is selling.
Okay.
All right, cool. I'm going to be smart and not write these down, so I have to go back and listen to it next week to remember what we all said. Buy or sell number 2. South Carolina will have 2 players with at least 50 receiving yards.
2 players. I'll buy.
But it'll be close?
I didn't say that.
Nope, it won't be close. Wesley?
Wow. Does Tennessee have a good secondary? I haven't even gone all into
You're
this
the film
yet.
guru.
Gosh.
Vulnerabilities in the secondary, in my opinion.
All right, well, here you go.
Okay.
How many games this year has Carolina had multiple receivers with at least 50 receiving yards?
I have no idea.
3.
I'm gonna
2.
buy it. Did you buy it or sell it?
I bought.
All right, I'm buying
Only
it.
2. Alabama, Shi Smith caught 6 passes for 90 yards. Brian Edwards caught 9 passes for 79 yards. And against Missouri, Brian Edwards caught 6 passes for 113 yards. Kyle Markaway caught 3 passes for 52 yards. Every other game, South Carolina's only had 1 receiver go over 50 yards.
Interesting. Good stat.
Thank you.
Still buy.
Still buy? Wes, what'd you say? I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, thanks. I buy.
I'm going to sell.
All right.
I'm going with the trends here. 5 out of 7 games without doing it. I don't know if this week will be a difference, and especially if they're going to be running the football. Rico is out for this game, for those of you that haven't heard yet. But no surgery is required on that knee. Seems like it was a sprain. Honestly, even at the time, it looked like he hyperextended it. It didn't look like any sort of tear. So I wasn't super surprised to hear that. Obviously, hope that he's back going forward because he's just been really fun to watch this year. Last buy or sell. Man, we're blowing through these. Normally, we would take like half an hour just for buy or sell. These are weird ones, too, because I spent time thinking about these yesterday. And normally, I don't think about it until I don't think about like what the next one is until y'all are answering the previous one. So I don't know if this works better or worse. But buy or sell, the two teams, South Carolina and Tennessee, that's who's playing on Saturday, will combine for more than 13 penalties. Officiating was a big story after this past weekend. Let's make it a story going into this weekend. So for reference, South Carolina is averaging 6.8 penalties per game, and Tennessee is averaging 6.3 per game.
I watched a condensed version of the Alabama-Tennessee game, one of those where they just really stack plays. There were about, unofficial stat here, there were about 29 penalties in that game on both sides. I mean,
it was a lot.
Tennessee had some bizarre ones, but there were a bunch total.
That's why I'm wondering. Like this is a clear makeup game from the SEC to these teams that they just maybe hosed the week before. Not that it like maybe made a difference in the Carolina game. Definitely didn't make a difference in the Tennessee game. But did they like go overboard and flag these teams like, oh, I hate these teams because they've been bitching about the refs all week, so here's 30 flags in this game? Or is it a little bit of an overcorrection? They just let both teams play, and there's like 5 penalties in the game.
I'd sell.
Sell. So there will be fewer than 13 total penalties in this game. Okay. Wes?
I have no idea how to answer. So the average is right on 13?
The average is 13.1.
Yeah. Wow. You know what? I'll buy it. I don't really know why, but I'm gonna buy it.
Analysis.
I'm gonna sell it too. Well, I just feel like our buy or sells are always like this many rushing yards, this many passing yards, this many turnovers or sacks or whatever. So I wanted to change it up, but y'all don't seem as engaged in this one. So maybe we'll just go back to doing the same buy or sells every week.
But it's just hard to on the fly.
Yeah, I should have prepped y'all for
a question
these.
like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if you sort of have a feel for you're already sort of thinking about passing yardage and rushing yards and stuff like that. These are a little more like on the spot.
All right, well, give me like a traditional one. We'll do a bonus buy or sell. This will be the tiebreaker buy or sell.
Okay. All right. Bonus is does South Carolina's starting quarterback throws for more yardage than whoever Tennessee's starting
Why
quarterback.
did you not just saying Ryan?
Why did you not say Ryan?
You know we don't know.
All the
you're
listeners
starting
are
Saturday?
freaked out
No,
now.
just because I was
Just because it's either going to be
Tennessee.
Mara or Garantano or what's that guy's name?
JT Shrout.
Trout? What?
Shrout.
Am I supposed to know who that is?
Not necessarily.
All right, cool. Because I don't.
Okay.
He'll have more passing yards? Oh, yeah, easily. Yeah, I'm going to hyper buy that. Tennessee's quarterbacks are all bad.
We spent like 30 minutes talking about how bad the passing game was for South Carolina was why.
Oh, yeah, but it is bad relative to what it should be because you have Brian Edwards, who's a future NFL guy, Shi Smith, who had a great sophomore season, Ryan Helinski, who has shown flashes and I think still is a good quarterback and still is going to be a good quarterback for Carolina for a long time. And it's a lot easier to pass the ball when you have a good rushing attack, which South Carolina does. So just you add all those things up, it should be better. It's not as bad as Tennessee's. I was listening to, actually Heath Klein tweeted this out yesterday. He was listening to some podcast condensed version of a Knoxville radio show yesterday, and some guy called in and was like, talking about Garantano, and was like, Jesus Christ did not die on the cross for this man to be our quarterback. I was like, whoa, that is really dramatic. But, I mean, if you saw that quarterback sneak that he tried to pull against Alabama, and you're a Tennessee fan, maybe you feel the same way. But point is, I'm gonna mega buy that.
I'm buying too.
If either of you sell, I will buy your stock in that.
Okay. Yeah, I'll buy it. Yep.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Okay. I guess mine was awful too. So
yeah, we're just bad at this week. It's okay. We had some great buy or sells through the weeks. Thanks again so much to the Bishop team for sponsoring our buy or sell. A little bit of recruiting news. I mentioned scandal for South Carolina. They're on a year probation. Somebody sent some text to somebody, and North Carolina had fake classes for 10 years, but Carolina got in trouble. How much does this? What is the actual impact? Because I know there's like they lose some evaluation days, some off-campus visit things.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to say there's no impact because, when you lose, when there's a time period where you can't be on the road or you lose a certain evaluation day. To me, one that stood out was, Will Muschamp can only visit with 10 prospects, if I'm reading it correctly, which is unclear because NCAA not always clear. Visit with 10 prospects during the contact period this year. Typically, it's going to be a lot higher than that, right? I mean, you get, it's not a limit on contact visits in total, it seemed like, but just 10 different prospects. Typically, it'd be higher than that because you're going to meet with all the commitments, then you're going to meet with your top targets, so they'll have to be more strategic about how they do that. Other than that, the impact is not huge. I thought that, and this was a negotiated sort of thing, and you got to keep in mind that South Carolina's had a few other minor issues, that were listed in the report, whether it was a similar situation that Muschamp had that was just, tiny impact thing. It was basically something that everybody else does. You work out a prospect at the high school during evaluation day, which you can't do. Everybody does it. They had that. They even referenced the Whitney stuff from way back then in the NCAA report. So you get some like aggregating factors, but aggravating, not aggregating. And then you also get some mitigating things. So overall, the penalties as to what was actually done, extremely minor. Like there might be like the layman might look at it and be like, well, they're cheating. These are things that I can tell you every single school does these things.
So why did they crack down in Carolina? Is it just because Will Muschamp was complaining about the officials and the SEC was like, hey, we have this? Do you want it?
No, this was something that was in 2018. There were...
Well, no, but they could have known about it, and they were like, oh, we're sweeping this under the rug because we sweep it under the rug for everybody. And then as soon as Will Muschamp starts putting the SEC on blast, they're like, hey, NCAA, you want to look at this?
They don't... I don't know that they sweep it under the rug. It's for everybody. Everybody does it, but it doesn't get turned in a lot because everybody does it. So, I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've seen it, and I've heard it from high school coaches. Including schools that are going to be in the playoff this year, have done this very thing. So if it gets turned in, they look into it, and then schools are sort of generally, yeah, we need to cooperate with that because why not cooperate? It's a relatively minor deal.
So this isn't going to, sink Carolina's recruiting for the next 10 years?
I do not anticipate that to be the case.
The worst part of college athletics, college sports are great, and I love them, and the passion and the tradition is part of what makes it so great. But golly, these conferences in the NCAA just make it so not fun for so many reasons. And we're not going to do a whole thing about it now. I just have to lament that in light of how has the SEC still not responded to Will Muschamp? What do they do? Or what are they doing? Are they not reviewing the tape from their games? Are they not? Can't even respond?
Well, Will Muschamp said that Greg Sankey texted him on Sunday and said they were still in the review process. Now,
okay, it's Wednesday.
I realize this. I don't know. Greg Sankey has been on the record saying that he's not sure that a suspension is always I don't remember the exact word he said. It's in my story, Pearson, that you didn't read.
By the way, everybody go read Chris's story. He puts you know what?
Hey,
Just
Chris,
go read the story. He puts the SEC absolutely on blast.
Chris, how was Wes's Carolina Confidential today?
I have never seen Chris fired up the way he was yesterday.
I have it pulled up. I'm going to read it. I have it pulled up on my phone. I've been meaning to read it.
It's just Sankey
it's embarrassing.
He said that.
What are you doing?
Well, he said that he's not really. Now he said this a while back, I think in 2016. But he said, we're basically what he said was we're prepared to acknowledge if there's problems with the officiating, but they haven't. And then, he doesn't know that they necessarily gain from a suspension. Now, the SEC has suspended refs in the past, or send them down to the Sun Belt or whatever, but they don't really. Really, that is a true thing.
That's awesome.
That's sort of, you send them down to the minors. But but the issue is they don't really announce it. There's no accountability. There's no transparency. So they spend this whole offseason saying that they're going to be more transparent.
They started a Twitter account just to comment on this stuff, and then they have.
Well, really, and
they only comment when they do things well.
Yeah, and that's the point. And Sankey has said in the past, it's been clear from his comments that his focus, he believes, and he's made no bones about it, he hadn't tried to hide it, that the focus should be on their successes in officiating. Well, they've had a lot of failures too, and so what are you going to do about it? Are you actually going to take this opportunity to Sankey and Steve Shaw, who he put in charge of officiating, are you going to show some backbone and make some changes and actually admit that at times there's a problem?
Yeah, spoiler,
do the officials,
they're not.
Right. And do the officials more often than not get it right? Probably so. I could agree with that.
Sure. And so admit when you get it wrong. Everyone else does, and everyone else has to, and everyone else is held accountable for it. And look, I'm not out for blood. I don't need to know. I don't care who these guys are. Somebody posted on Twitter, they're like, this is the officiating crew, whatever. I don't know. I don't remember the names. I don't care. I don't care if they get suspended. I don't care if they get fined, whatever. But just call Will Muschamp and be like, yeah, sorry, we screwed this up. Or, no, actually, we're going to stand by what we said. This is the third time that I'm going to do this week. And so this, I guess, is an instance where I'm out for blood and I'm going to put somebody on blast. How stupid is Matt Austin? To come on and just make up like a phantom element of holding just to make it seem like his guys are right. Like, that's embarrassing.
It was strange because he agreed with the other calls.
And it took him, I mean, it was like pulling teeth to get him to admit that it was a false start. And the right tackle, like, stood up. He was turning a backflip before the ball was snapped. And Matt Austin was like, bad. yeah, that could probably be it's like, that is a false start. If you start before the ball is snapped, that is a false start. Just, I don't know. Don't suck, man. People get stuff wrong all the time. I thought Carolina was going to get their ass beat by Georgia. I own up to that. People get stuff wrong all the time. That doesn't mean you're bad at your job. Doesn't mean you're good at your job. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that everybody gets stuff wrong. Just allow yourself to be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that was strange. There's no element of holding in the NCAA manual that says, it's only if defenders running side by side. Now, if that is the definition, if that's how they talk about it in these official meetings, we're going to call it like this, then let that be known. Mm-hmm. If you're going to educate the people, so to speak, on, well, the fans just don't know, well, then let the fan base and the media know, okay, it's not holding if you're running side by side with a guy for 40 yards and holding on to his jersey. Let us know that. Because otherwise, all we're doing is, we're going to interpret it how we interpret it, which is by the letter of the law and what we see. And Israel Mukwamu tries to make a move toward the defender, and they pull him back. But anyway.
This is the office of SEC officials. This is not the Illuminati. They don't need to act like it's the Illuminati. It's kind of childish. They just need to grow up, I think. But I don't know. Wes, you want to put the officials on blast since we're doing it right now?
I'm good. I've gotten it out.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, in that case, tell us who won the Slotchkis Challenge last week.
Yeah, very fitting name, given that it's closing in on Halloween. But Garnet Blood with a really
sanguinous name.
Really good prediction, 35-24. Congrats. You won a free $60 tailgating package from Slotsky Zelly that I'll be mailing out to you today. And,
not the tray, the gift certificate.
Everyone can get on Gamecock Central right now and play for this week. If you predict the score, closest to the score for the South Carolina-Tennessee game, you can actually do that on the Insiders Forum or the free Fighting Gamecocks Forum. And, good luck. You get some great Slotsky's food out of it, and you can even get a chocolate chip cookie, which is Pearson's favorite.
Mm-hmm. You can do it for free on the Fighting Gamecock Forum, or you can do it on the Insiders Forum if you're a subscriber to Gamecock Central. And if you're not right now and you want to be or want to try it out for a month for free, just use the exclusive podcast code GCPOD, and you can do that and go play the Slotchkis Challenge on the Insiders Forum. But also, we should remind you, you have to predict the score, and in case of a tie, Wesley does have a tiebreaker that is an important element of any sort of picking game. And somebody, let's give this person a shout out because this was great.
Shout out to Lex Gamecock 213. You didn't give a score, man,
but gave a really close.
Gave a good tiebreaker.
Yeah, it was a quality tiebreaker. Just have if your score prediction were as good as your tiebreaker, maybe you'd be going home with that $60 worth of Slotchkis too. That's a lot. That's really good stuff. Yeah, I guess that's it. So for Wes, for Chris, I'm Pearson. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. A lot of good stuff going on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network right now, including we're just a couple weeks away from the start of basketball season, so that is very exciting. We'll have some more stuff going up on the podcast network once basketball season gets underway, so get excited for that. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back on Friday with another Get Cocky podcast. Wes and Chris will be back Monday after the Tennessee game. In the meantime, y'all have a great week. Thanks for listening.